Today's lesson is World Bank warns of lost decade. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
Hello, I'm Kiki.
And today we're going to talk about the economy in the future or for the next decade. And there's some bad news here. The World Bank is warning of a lost decade in which the economy is not going to do very well.
So in today's article, we're going to find out what this lost decade is.
Indeed. So let's listen to the first part of our lesson right now, and we'll be right back to talk about it.
World Bank warns of lost decade. After nearly 3 decades of rapid global economic growth, the World Bank is now warning of a lost decade in which growth is predicted to slow dramatically through 2030. Such a slump would be especially dangerous, according to the bank, because it would limit the world's ability to fight climate change and reduce world poverty.
大家好，第一部分我们来介绍形容词 economic， 它的意思是经济上的或是经济的。例如 The world is going through difficult economic times right now. 世界现在正经历着艰难的经济时局。又或者说 For economic reasons, the government was forced to raise taxes. 由于经济上的考量，政府被迫提高税率。
Okay, so we've got the World Bank, and this bank warns of a lost decade. Of course, if you warn somebody about something, you let them know some information that something bad is going to happen or that you're going to threaten them or something like that. I warn you, if you come to my house again, I'm going to call the police. But here they're warning us, they're letting us know that we're going to be facing a lost decade, which is a period of 10 years, and things are going to be not so great during this decade. We're going to lose some of the wonderful things that we're used to.
After nearly 3 decades or 30 years of rapid global economic growth, so for 30 years, we've had really fast worldwide economic growth. Economic just means things that are involved with the economy or with money and in the financial sector. So we see our economy growing, people are making money, and it's been happening for 3 decades. But the World Bank is now warning us. They are telling us we have to watch out for the lost decade that might be coming up, in which growth is predicted to slow dramatically through 2030.
Right, so we've had about 30 years of rapid global economic growth. And, of course, we're all used to money being all over the place, and most people are doing quite well. But the World Bank is saying, well, the party is over. We're going to experience this lost decade. Growth will slow, and it will slow dramatically or to a large extent through the year 2030. And such a slump would be especially dangerous, according to the bank, because it would limit the world's ability to fight climate change and reduce world poverty. So if you talk about a situation in which the economy is not doing well and products and services are not selling the way they used to, you could call that an economic slump. Okay, just a slowdown in the economy, and that happens from time to time, and most people don't worry too much about it. The economy will pick up again, but in this particular case, it's going to be dangerous, according to the bank, because it will limit our ability to fight climate change. So if we don't have enough money to fight climate change, then the temperatures are going to get higher and higher, and sea levels will continue to rise.
So if we have this slump in the economy, we might not be able to help people that might need some financial aid from us. So let's listen on to the second part of our article and find out why we are entering this lost decade.
The bank blames several major events, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for this potential lost decade. However, as with any global economic problem, the causes are even more complex than that. For example, increases in interest rates meant to tame inflation are also responsible, as they make borrowing more expensive, a situation which is particularly challenging for developing countries. As worrying as this may sound, a solution is possible. According to the bank, policymakers can help protect the global economy through programs designed to increase productivity, encourage investing, and bring more people into the labor market. Measures to boost shipping efficiency, slow inflation, and make it easier for women to work are just some examples of potential fixes.
第二部分我们看到 invasion 这个名词的意思是侵略、武装入侵，也可以是侵犯的意思。例如 An invasion of ants made us end our picnic early. 蚂蚁的侵略使我们提早结束了我们的野餐。又或者说 Manny was angry that the police had entered his home, which he felt was an invasion of his privacy. Manny 对警察进入他家感到生气，这让他感觉他的隐私受到了侵犯。另外补充这个字的动词 invade, I-N-V-A-D-E, invade, 它的意思是入侵或是侵略。举例来说 Social media has invaded almost every aspect of our lives. 社群媒体几乎已经入侵了我们生活的每个层面。再举个例子 The army invaded the town in a surprise attack. 该军队在一场突袭中侵略了那个城镇。下一个来介绍名词 inflation 这个字的意思是通货膨胀。例如 The government may have to raise interest rates to control inflation. 政府可能得提高利率以控制通货膨胀。或是 Inflation would be a concern if the demand on the market continues to grow. 若市场需求持续扩大，通货膨胀将成为令人关心的事。再来我们看到单字 invest 它是动词，指的是投资或是投入。例如 I invested a lot of money in Jimmy's business. 我在 Jimmy 的生意上投资了很多钱。下一个我们来介绍名词 measure 指的是方法或是措施。例如 Tests aren't always the best measure of how smart someone is. 考试并不一定是测量某人聪明程度的最好方法。又或者说 The government is announcing new measures to protect people against the disease. 该政府宣布新的措施以保护人民抵抗疾病。最后这个字也可以当作动词，它的意思是测量、计量或是衡量。举例来说 Holly measured her little sister's height. Holly 替她的妹妹量身高。
Okay, let's move on now to the second part of our lesson. It says, the bank, or the World Bank, blames several major events, such as the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for this potential lost decade. So the phrase is to blame something for something, and so they blame lots of events for this potential lost decade.
So you can blame somebody for pushing somebody else. You can blame John for losing Casey's iPad. So you're blaming something or someone for the outcome of something else.
Yeah, maybe John is not at fault there. Maybe Casey just didn't put it where she's supposed to put it, and she blamed John anyway. And the bank blames several events like the pandemic, which of course we have gone through. It seems like that's pretty much over now, the COVID-19 pandemic, where this virus spread to all parts of the world. And when one country moves its military into another country, that is an invasion, and the verb is to invade. Russia invaded Ukraine, and we're talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that's what the bank blames for this potential lost decade. If something's potential, it's likely to happen in the future.
And the word pandemic here, usually it describes a type of disease or a virus that is spread very quickly and in a large area. So it's a pandemic. So we also know there have been many instances of several pandemics in history, like the Spanish flu or the plague and all of that. So those are pandemics, and it's usually something that's very serious because it's hard to contain.
Okay, the paragraph goes on to say, however, as with any global economic problem, the causes are even more complex than that. So, as with any global economic problem, just like any problem that has to do with the economy of the world, the causes are not so simple. They are even more complex than that. For example, increases in interest rates meant to tame inflation are also responsible as they make borrowing more expensive, a situation which is particularly challenging for developing countries. Yes, when you hear economic news, you often hear them talking about interest rates, and that, of course, talks about how much money you have to return to the bank when you borrow money from them, and they have different rates expressed as a percentage. And yes, indeed, if they increase interest rates, that means they want to control or tame inflation. Inflation is when prices keep going up, and I believe it also has to do with an inflation of the money supply. They just keep printing up money, and that causes all sorts of problems.
And when you're trying to tame something, you're trying to take control or trying to make the situation not as severe as it might become. And sometimes we can also use the word tame to describe teaching or training an animal. Like that lion is really tamed because he had a good trainer.
Right. Okay. So if the interest rates go up, it's difficult for people to borrow money. Borrowing money, it gets more expensive. And that will be challenging for developing countries who need to borrow money to build up their infrastructure and their societies. And if interest rates are too high, they'll have difficulty doing that. So there will be an economic slowdown or an economic slump. Now, moving on to the next paragraph here in part 2, it says, as worrying as this may sound, or even though this sounds to be worrisome or something that we should worry about, a solution is possible. There's still hope. It's not a dire situation. We can still change this, and we might not actually have this lost decade if we make proper preparations.
According to the bank or the World Bank, policymakers can help protect the global economy through programs designed to increase productivity, encourage investing, and bring more people into the labor market. So the way that we can try to stop this lost decade is policymakers or people that work in the government, they can try to help and protect the global economy. So the global economy is the money that runs through all the different countries and how they are linked together. Different governments or people in the bank, they can talk to each other and figure out how they can do things to try to protect the economy.
Yep, and the economy is basically referring to all the money and the wealth and resources of a country or the world, and it talks about production and consumption of goods and services. So that's what the economy is all about, and economic is the adjective. And they want to protect the global economy through programs designed to increase productivity, to encourage investing, and bring more people into the labor market. Investing, of course, is when people give someone money for a future project so that it can be successful in the future. Lots of us, of course, are looking for ways to invest our money so that in the future we can make some money and get some interest and things like that. And we also want to get more people working. I'm thinking maybe women who are staying home and being housewives can actually come out and work in the labor market and become bank officials or whatever. And measures to boost shipping efficiency, slow inflation, and make it easier for women to work are just some examples of potential fixes. So these are measures we're talking about. These are actions by the government that they can enact or that they can bring about and make people follow them. They want to boost shipping efficiency. To boost just means to increase by a large amount. And we're talking about shipping when we send products all over the world on those shipping vessels, in container vessels, and then we want to boost their shipping efficiency by using maybe more fuel-efficient fuels or like solar power or electricity. Maybe that will make it less expensive to ship goods around the world.
And efficiency is also to describe being able to do something more efficiently. So you want to do something in a way that maybe it takes less time, it takes less amount of the procedures are shorter. So you want to boost the efficiency because you want something to go faster.
Exactly. And of course, we also want to make it easier for women to work. That's not a problem here in Taiwan. Most men and women all work. But in the Middle East, in some more conservative countries, a lot of women don't work. If we can get them out of the home and into the office, that could help us fix the future economy. And these are some potential fixes. Here, a fix as a noun is just some kind of solution to a problem. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to the third part.
A global growth decline would impact everyone, but only governments have sufficient power to prevent one. So, people everywhere will have to hope that policymakers make the right moves to avert an economic slowdown.
Now, here in the third part of our lesson for today, it says, a global growth decline would impact everyone, but only governments have sufficient power to prevent one. So we need to depend on our governments to prevent this awful situation from happening.
So people everywhere will have to hope that policymakers make the right moves to avert an economic slowdown. So everyone in the world, we all have to work together and really hope that the people in power, the people that are in these banks or our governments, they have to make the right moves. They have to make the right decisions. So making a right move, just like in chess, you want to make a right move while you're going against an opponent. Or when you're making a decision, you want to make the right move. So this is basically just trying to describe making the right decision when it comes to something that you have to make a very important decision. And in this case, we have to make sure and really hope that all the people in power, they make the right decisions to help us avert an economic slowdown.
Right, so we're talking about people in government who make policy for the economy, but we're also talking about banks themselves and how they decide to lend money and things like that. These are all policy makers, and we hope that they are competent and that they can make the right moves. They can do the right things to avert an economic slowdown. If you avert something, that means you avoid it, especially if it's something that's very scary and that you don't want to happen. It could also apply to your attention. You might want to avert your attention. If you don't want to look at something scary, you just look at something else to avert your attention. But in this particular case, we want to avert an economic slowdown. We want to prevent it from happening because I guess we're all kind of used to things going pretty well. Even though the stocks jump up and down all the time, we're still basically doing fairly well. But if there is this lost decade, what are we going to do? We might all end up homeless.
Another example of how to use avert would be there's something violent showing on TV, so the parents ask their kids to avert their eyes. So they want them to look away from the TV.
Exactly. That's one sense of the meaning, but here avert means to avoid, especially we want to avoid an economic slowdown or a recession, or even worse than that, a Great Depression like they had during the 1930s. We don't want to see that happen ever again. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's listen now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分的第一句提到 The bank blames several major events... for this potential lost decade. 世界银行将这个可能失落的10年归因于几个重大事件。好，这边我们要来补充动词 blame 的用法。blame 它当动词，它有责怪、怪罪或是归咎于什么什么的意思。那我们可以用 blame 某人或某事物 for something， 或者是用 blame something on 加上某人或某事物 去表达说把什么什么怪罪于某人或某事啊，将什么什么归咎于某人或某事物这样子。举例来说 Ron always blames others for his mistakes. Ron 老是把自己的错怪到别人身上。好，那另外呢，也可以用这个某人或某事物 be to blame for something 去表达某人事物应该为什么来负责，或者是什么什么就是某人或某事物所造成的。举例来说 Who is to blame for this problem? 谁该为这个问题负责呢？好，同样在课文第二部分呢，有一句写到 As worrying as this may sound, a solution is possible. 尽管这听起来令人担忧，但可能有解决方法。同学们可能会觉得很奇怪，句子里面没有出现 though, although 或是 while 之类的连接词，为什么会有尽管点点点但怎么样怎么样的语义呢？好，其实句子里面这个 as worrying as this may sound 也可以写作Worrying as this may sound 这个形容词 worrying 后方的 as 它就跟 though 意思相同，是指说虽然尽管。那像这样的句型结构就是用形容词或副词加上 as 或 though 加主词加上 be 动词或动词，这是一个引导让步副词子句的倒装句型，目的就是要强调句首的形容词或副词。好，那我们注意两个重点。第一个重点是句型里面呢，我们只能用 as 或是 though， 不可以使用 although。那么在美语当中呢，常常会在强调的形容词或副词前面加上 as， 也就是会变成 as 形容词 as 或者是 as 副词 as， 再加上主词，再搭配动词这样子。好，那我们来练习几个句子会更清楚。第一个例句Although it may seem tricky, it's actually quite easy. 虽然它看起来好像很困难，但其实蛮简单的。我们现在要强调形容词 tricky， 把它移到句首，那这时候就要把 although 改成 as 或者是 though， 那就会写作 tricky as it may seem， 或者是 tricky though it may seem， 或者是 as tricky as it may seem， 都好 it's actually quite easy。 好，那第二个例句是 Although he tried hard, he couldn't finish it on time. 尽管他很努力，但就是无法准时完成。我们现在要强调这个副词 hard， 就把它移到句首。那么这时候呢，要将 although 改成 as 或者是 though， 那就会写作 hard though he tried， 或者是 hard as he tried， 也可以加上 as， 就是 as hard as he tried, he couldn't finish it on time。 好，那我们回来看课文句子哦，它原本就可以写作说 although this may sound worrying， 或者是 though this may sound worrying, a solution is possible。 那他把这个 worrying 移到句首，那么这时候 although 就要改成用 as 或者是 though 去表达，所以就会变成课文的句子咯。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Economic. The recent economic troubles have caused reduced employment and increased poverty rates. Invasion. The country remains under threat of invasion by enemy forces. Inflation. Rising oil prices are likely to lead to inflation in the coming months. Invest. If you want to get the most out of your savings, you should invest your money rather than just put it in the bank. Measure. The hospital introduced strict measures to control the spread of the virus. Boost. Exercising regularly can boost your energy and improve your health. Efficiency. The efficiency of the factory was raised considerably by the new production process.
Discussion Starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, do you think increased economic growth is always a good thing? Why or why not?
I do think increased economic growth is really important because we really don't want to go into a recession. We don't want inflation. When you have inflation, recession goes hand in hand, and that means people aren't making the same amount of money to go along with this slump. So as things are getting more expensive, you might not have enough money to pay for all these things. And if we have economic growth, it's really important because not only does it affect every individual and how they keep their living, we don't want to see other countries countries starting to fall back behind.
Yeah, that all sounds very reasonable, but I think increased economic growth sometimes has some negatives. For example, in the construction industry, of course, they need to keep on building new buildings all the time, and that means we're going to have urbanization where farms are going to disappear and we'll have these apartment complexes in the middle of rice paddies, and the farmers will lose their jobs and will be less able to produce food in the future. We might all face global starvation. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Kiki.
See you next time.